usage of the moed concept from Genesis 1:14 all the way through means a appointed time. One of God's appointed times. So it's interesting it's used here that way. And in 2 Kings chapter 4, if you do a comparison, the prophet there also says, at a certain time, you'll have a son. So they're putting these two phrases together in the 2 Kings passage to link these texts up. Now look what happened. Verse 15. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. Verse 16. By the way, the word for laughter, zahak. Zahak. From zahak we get yitzhak. He will laugh. And God, for every time you look at this child, you're going to think laughter. You laughed at God kind of like, like that could ever happen. And God's going, oh, yeah, it did happen. God's going to get the last laugh. Okay, so the child's name is, he will laugh, right? All right, verse 16. Then the men rose from there and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, again, the Lord thought, he's thinking here, he's not saying it out loud. Right? Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. Now look at that. I have known him in order that he may command his... What's the purpose of God choosing Abraham? Is so that he'll be able to pass on the Torah and the commandments of God to his children. We say it this way. The purpose of you being a parent, the purpose of you being a grandparent, is so that you will pass on the commandments of God to your children. It's important that you think multi-generational and you think in terms of passing it down. Verse 20. And the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very great, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom. But now look at this. How many of your translations say, but Abraham stood before the Lord? How many of your translations say that? But Abraham stood before the Lord. How many of your everybody's translations say that? Anybody's differ?
What verse is that?
Verse
21.
21.
No.
It's actually 22. At the end of verse 22. How many of your translations say, but Abraham stood before the Lord? Raise your hand. It says, but Abraham stood before the Lord.
Mine says remain standing.
Remain standing. Okay, fine.
It's still standing before the Lord. Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? What is it?
Still stood.
Okay, all right. Here's one of those rare places in the Hebrew Scripture that we have what's called a tikkunei sofarim. The Masoretes, at this point, actually inserted themselves into the text because they didn't like the idea that the text actually, as it read, said that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was standing before Abraham. So they switched it. And they put in the notes that we are switching this. Because they found that the idea of, if you look at other places in the Hebrew Scripture, when an inferior stands in front of a superior, you fall on the carpet, so to speak. So it was an inferior standing before a superior. So they didn't like the fact that Yahweh was standing before Abraham, so they flipped it. This is one of the few places where your texts have been messed with because they didn't like the idea that Yahweh was standing before Abraham. So they flipped it and said Abraham was standing before him. Okay. One of about 18 places where they do this kind of thing, they find it messed up to say that this happened, so they kind of correct it in the text. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it messes up the messianic intent when you do that. I think you're right. But yeah, there's a few other places where they do this. Like I said, 17 other places where they mark it out for us. But it's still all right. Now look what happens. he tells Abraham what's going to happen. But Abraham came near and said, this goes back to Carrie's earlier question about fair. Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Do you and I suppose that there are times where people who are, let me put it this way, innocent or kind, gentle, compassionate, non-aggressive, easygoing, innocent, do you think there are times when those kind of people suffer because of others who are not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you think that there are times where there is, to put it in the terms of warfare, that there is collateral damage?
Obvious.
What happens, I see this all the time, what happens to children when parents go nutso? Children suffer. Do they deserve to suffer? No. Did they do anything that they should suffer? No. Do I wish that they didn't? Yes. But I see at times where parents do crazy and stupid things and their children have to suffer for it. Fair? No, not for a moment. But nowhere in the Bible does it say, and God shall be fair, that everything will work out the way. So Sodom and Gomorrah, there are righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, there are unrighteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. And now Abram says, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? And he says, in essence, yes. However, I am willing to be gracious. Look what happens. They start the dickering, the negotiation again. This is good. This is good Jewish negotiation. Yeah, he's not even Jewish. He says, would you spare it for 50 righteous people? Yes, I'll spare it for 50 righteous. And it finally gets down to 10. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll spare it for 10 righteous people. Which also says something, which isn't fair either. Sometimes the wicked benefit because of the righteous. Nobody seems to have a problem with that one. There are times when God says, there's a whole bunch of wickedness and one or two righteous people, but because of that righteous person, I'm going to withhold judgment on the rest of them. And nobody seems to complain about that one. When it works to our benefit, we're okay with it. When it doesn't work to our benefit, then we kind of go, that's not fair. And God says again, it's not about fair. Sometimes because of the righteous, I withhold judgment on the wicked. And I'm glad that there's times when he does that. Now look what happens. Go over to verse 30. He says, then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 be found there. He says, if there's 30, we get down to 20, we get down to 10. He says, verse 32, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Okay? Verse 19. Now the two angels, now they're called angels. Earlier in chapter 18, they are called men. Now they're called malach, messengers. Malach, messengers. Sent. They come to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. By the way, any of you who have been to Israel, you know, or if you've seen pictures archaeologically, you know that when we talk about gates, gates are huge. Gates are the administrative centers of the town. It's where the elders meet to do business. It's where contracts are signed. It's where judges render decisions. Gates are huge in the ancient Near East. And they're usually multi-layered. So that you walk in a gate, and then there will be an opening on both sides. You go a little further, there'll be an opening on the other side. And you walk through a labyrinth of these openings on both sides. So that you can have groups meet. Business groups, civic groups. They meet at the gate to do business. So Lot is in the gate. And it says, he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. He said, here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet, Then you may rise early and go on your way. Well, who does that sound like? That sounds like Abraham. Right? So, Lot has the same hospitality that Uncle Abraham has. And he's now entertaining, and the text later on says, he's entertaining angels unaware. He doesn't know who these guys are. Okay, this is why Hebrews says, be careful, because some of you have entertained angels unaware. Okay? He doesn't know who these guys are. They're just two travelers. And he doesn't know that they're Malach. Okay? He doesn't know who they are. They just look like regular men to him. Look what he says. Verse 4, now before they laid down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter, surrounded the house. And they called Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out that we may know them. Okay, and I think the Hebrew word know there is being used to mean sexuality. Okay? So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind, and he said, please, my brother, do not do so wickedly. See now look at Lot. Tell me that Sodom and Gomorrah has not affected Lot. He says, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. Here again is the culture. The culture said that if guests come into your home, you are responsible for their protection until they leave. No matter what. You had better protect your guests no matter what. That's culture. I'm not saying Bible, I'm saying culture. And here's Lot buying into the culture that it's better to protect his guests than his own daughters. That's how warped and how perverse things have gotten. Now look what happens. Verse 9, and they said, that being the Malach, stand back. This one came in to stay here and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with him than with you. They pressed hard against the door to break down the door, but the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. Remember what we talked about earlier. Blindness. Who can give blindness? Who can take blindness? Those who are in the realm of being a Elohim. Okay? An Elohim that you can take sight and you can give sight. I'm going to skip down now, because these are, most of you are familiar with the story. I'm not going to move on, but here's what happens. I do want to mention this. Verse 15, when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hand of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Then Lot said to them, please know, my lords, indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight. You have increased your mercy, which you have shown by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me, and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there, and my soul shall live. And he said to him, see, I have favored you concerning this thing also, which I will not overthrow the city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there. So actually that city didn't get judgment because of Lot. For I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Verse 23, the sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Now look at this. Here's the verse that's killer. Look at this verse. It says, verse 24, then the Lord, Yehovah, rained fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Yahweh out of the heavens. This is the verse, this is one of the verses that really, really stumps the rabbis. It actually doesn't stump them. It's one that they shut the discussion down on. Because here's what you have. The text reads this way. Then the Yahweh on the ground, on the earth, on the land, rained down fire and brimstone from the Yahweh in the heavens. There was a Yahweh down here and a Yahweh up there. And they called this concept the two powers in heaven. They went, uh-oh, we've got Yahweh on the ground and we've got Yahweh in the heavens. And this is all a great discussion going on until the first century when Christianity comes along. And they start claiming that Jesus is God, and they say, okay, we got to shut the discussion down. And they called it the two powers of heaven. Because there was a Yahweh on the ground and a Yahweh in the heavens. And this is, we're in Genesis. We're only the first 19 chapters. And I've got Yahweh coming down. Notice that he always comes down. It never says we go up. And when judgment comes, God moves us away from the judgment. He put Noah in an ark. He didn't take Noah up to some celestial realm. He didn't take this family to some celestial realm. He moved them out of the way of judgment. That's the consistent direction the scriptures move us. Now look what happens. But, verse 26, but his wife, Mrs. Lot, looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. If you go way out past Masada, you get to the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea, one of the reasons that makes it so dead, is that there's a high salt content. And in fact, on the shore of the Dead Sea around it, you can see a layer of salt, white salt all around it. In fact, when we went out there this last time, there was a processing plant for salt in that area that had mounds of salt that were higher than this ceiling outside. It was unreal. Sea salt from the Dead Sea that they're processing. And we drove by these, there's these huge mounds of salt. And it's a very and then as you go a little further past the Dead Sea, you get to the furthest tip of it, you also see a mountain region, and they have actually a sign there that says a place where they think maybe one of these pillars of salt is Mrs. Lot. I don't think so.
But we don't know.
Look at verse 27. Now Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the plain, the land of the plain, and he saw, behold, the smoke of the land which went up like smoke of a furnace. Remember what we said, from the time of the flood forward, everything from here on out, the judgment of God, the mass judgment of God, will be by fire. He's going to use fire from here on out. Now, any questions on this section? A lot of stuff going on here, but any questions or comments? Yes?
The primary thing there was the term that with Abraham, it switched from 3 men to one, which was Yod-Heh-Vav.
Right, and then to Malak. Yeah, so now I want to
specifically identify him.
Yes. One of them was Yod-Heh-Vav, 2 of them were Malak. Look at. I want to show you. By the way, this is one of those. Sometimes the things we do to our children come back to bite us. In that category. Sometimes there is in the scriptures what we call measure for measure. Look at chapter 19, verse 30. It says, Then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him. For he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. I'm skipping to verse 31. Now the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come into us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drunk with wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. Remember, he was going to sell them. He was going to throw them away. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. That's pretty drunk. Verse 34, it happened the next day. Same thing happened. Look at verse 37. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. Moab. Ma, from, his, father. Moab, from his father. That's his name. So the preposition men contracted. So ma, from his father. And then we have Ammon. And the younger son called his name Ben Ami. So we have the Moabites and the Ammonites. This is their ancestry. These people were born under circumstances that you kind of look at and just go, wow.
Well, they have
Don't say wow.
From
Don't say wow.
Sodom and Gomorrah, where there was so much wickedness. They
Right.
were desensitized.
Yeah.
So,
You see what we're dealing with? Canaanites, Moabites, Ammonites. You see how they're coming into existence?
Because
They're
of
coming
sin.
into existence through very, very perverse means. And God says, these aren't the means by which I want people groups to begin. This is not the way things should go. Now, I want to skip over to verse 21. Chapter 21, excuse me. Just look at the fulfillment here. Chapter 21, verse 1. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. And the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken him. And Abraham called the name of his son, which was born him, whom Sarah bore him, Yitzhak. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. All right, now you have the backstory. All right, now go to chapter 22. Go to chapter 22. This is why chapter 22 opens this way. Now it came to pass after these things. What things? All the stuff that we just were looking at. And I've said this in the past. And I think it bears repeating because he says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land on Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. An olah, a whole burnt offering. Now, if you as a parent were to hear this, well, first of all, why doesn't it strike Abraham strange that God would ask him to do this? Culture.
Yeah.
Right? Child sacrifice, not a big problem. You can sacrifice a child. In fact, that may be one of the best and brightest ways of demonstrating that life has been given to you by God, is to give the firstborn of yours back to the God by offering it up as a sacrifice. It seems to me very, very perverse and twisted. But to many people in the ancient Near East, it seemed to be the way things ought to be.
Except that even from the beginning, he says God will provide that sacrifice. He never says, even though he's told to do so, he's going to do the actions to do so. He never says, I'm sorry, Isaac, but you're going down. He says God's going to provide.
Well, yes, later on. Yes.
But even from the beginning, though, he says that there is a provision. Even to Isaac, he said there's provision already done.
Right.
So he never, even though he's doing the actions, he never says, I'm going to take you up and I'm whacking you
It seems
off.
like, though, that Abraham is intent on offering up Isaac. Because he puts him to the altar. He ties him to the
Oh, yeah, but he does the actions, but he never says that's what I'm going to do. He still confesses that God's going to provide. So there's...
Oh, yeah. But maybe God was going to provide through Isaac. Here's my point. Think about this. What prepared... And we've talked about this in the past, too. It doesn't look like it doesn't look like, again, I'm going from the silence, so Cohen is right on this one, this is silence. It doesn't look like he talks to Sarah about this.
No, he doesn't.
Okay?
Could you say that again? It's on recording.
Yeah, Cohen raises the general objection, or that this is not on, this
No,
is, for the record,
Skip to the good part.
oh yeah.
Where he thinks he's right. Yeah, he's really,
Cohen's probably right on this.
probably, but
Probably.
not
More than
100%.
likely. No, what I'm saying is that he's correct that I'm going from the silence of the text. Okay, so I'm filling in some gaps that may not be accurate. But it doesn't look, at least from the narrative, it doesn't look like Abraham goes to Sarah and says, hey, by the way, I'm thinking about taking our son up to Mount Moriah and offering him as a sacrifice. I got the feeling, if I, just from what I know of Sarah, as protective as she is, that she'd have said, I don't think so. Not going to happen. How does, yeah.
Well, and Isaac is not a young lad.
Right, we've come to that conclusion as well, that he's not, the most he could be is 37 at the extreme end. He's probably somewhere in his teenage years at least.
Yeah.
Based on what we can tell, probably mid-teens. He's able to carry on a conversation, he's able to carry wood. So it's an indication that he's not a baby. He's able to fend for himself somewhat.
Bet he was 33.
So, yeah, we don't know his age. But it's enough that he's having intelligent conversation, carrying wood, traveling a distance, so not a baby. But here's the thing that I think is interesting. What makes Abraham accede to this type of request? What makes him think that that he's hearing from God?
He believes in resurrection.
Well, he does believe in resurrection.
Well, he's heard from God
He's heard,
before.
he's heard from God before.
Say that again.
He's heard from God before.
Okay.
He left his homeland because of it.
He recognizes the voice.
Yeah.
He recognizes the voice. And so he doesn't say, it's like the comic strip where it shows this girl has gone off the edge of a mountain and she's holding on to one lone branch that's basically over the mountain. It's the only one there, and there's a free fall if she lets go of the branch. And then the next thing she says, she's looking up, she says, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And then in the next frame, you don't see God, but just the little box. It says, let go and I will save you. And then the next frame, she says, is there anybody else up there? You get the feeling that maybe Abraham would think, is there anybody else up there? But he's heard the voice before. He's heard the voice before. Let me suggest that what prepares us for obedience in the future is having heard the voice of God in the text and having been obedient to it, prepares us to hear it in the future.